Okay, so what I want to start with today is a quick preview of what we're going to be doing next time because it'll help you with the homework. Then I want to go over the last homework assignment a little bit with you just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, gets what was going on, and then we'll move into some interpretive exercises, okay? All right, so next time you're going to be reading chapter 6 in Writing Analytically, which is about claims and evidence, right? So the first thing you're going to be asked to do is to try this exercise on page 151 that is going to ask you to take about 2 paragraphs from a piece of your own writing, right? So a paper that you have written probably for another class, right? And you are going to examine those 2 paragraphs and you're going to identify which sentences are claims and which are pieces of evidence, right? So before you get started on that, I want to make sure that we're clear exactly on what these terms mean. So what is a claim? What does it mean to make a claim?
Will you state something?
Okay, yeah, I mean, it is stating something, right?
Something in brief.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track there, right? So a claim is a statement that is not objectively true, right? A claim is a statement that, like, it's a statement that someone else could possibly disagree with, right? That you would have to provide evidence to back up. So a claim excuse me. I don't know what's wrong today. So evidence, if we're talking about, so if a claim is a statement that is not objectively true, then what is evidence?
Something that makes it true.
Detailed, supported detail.
I think that, again, you're on the right track, but I want you to try to not so much think about evidence as something that you use to support a claim, but as something you use to generate a claim, right? So, excuse me. Evidence is objective data that can be used to generate and support a claim. Now this will become probably more clear as we proceed with the class, but like what I want you to do generally when you're writing is start with evidence, start with data, right? And let let the claim come from that, right? Rather than starting with the claim and trying to then you pick evidence to support it, right? What we're going to be doing first is looking at evidence and seeing where it takes us. But I think this is enough for you to go on for the homework assignment, right? So if you see statements in your writing that are objectively true, right? Okay, this is something I could look up. That's evidence, right? If it's something that is not clearly true on its own without backing, then it's a claim, right? You may also have some sentences that don't seem to be either. Those probably belong to some kind of special category, which we'll talk about next time, right? But for our purposes for the homework, just focus on identifying claims and evidence, right? So any questions about that? Okay, so the other homework assignment, this is assignment 1 on page 176, is going to ask you to identify and explain 5 enthymemes. Now, I'm going to assume that neither of you have any fucking clue what an enthymeme is, right? because generally freshmen who come into this class have never heard this word before. Okay, so enthymemes are actually kind of like they're an important part of the way we talk and the way we express ideas, but we rarely actually discuss them, right? It's just like one of those things that's just kind of part of human communication that is rarely examined. So in order to understand what an enthymeme is, I'm first going to have to explain to you what a syllogism is. Have either of you ever heard this term before? Okay, so a syllogism is it's a reasoning tool, right? It's a way to test whether a particular proposition is logical. And a syllogism consists of three parts, right? So first, you have what's called the major premise. So if I say something like, all human beings are mortal, so the major premise is a general statement about a broad class of objects, right? The minor premise, the statement that follows, applies this to a specific case, right? All human beings are mortal. Socrates is a human being. And the conclusion, then, where we combine the major premise with the minor premise, is that Socrates is mortal, right? If all human beings are mortal, and Socrates is a human being, then Socrates too must be mortal, right? So in order for a syllogism to be valid, the major premise and the minor premise have to agree, right? So if I switched some of these words around, right? If I said all mortals are human beings, Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates is mortal, does the syllogism still work? All mortals are human beings, Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates is mortal. Does it? All mortals are human beings. If Socrates is a human being, then Socrates is mortal. It complicates it a little bit, right? Yeah. So, what a syllogism does is test whether a statement is logical or not. It doesn't test whether it's true or not. So syllogisms can sometimes lead to propositions that are not true, right? So if I say that everything that can swim is a fish, Morgan can swim, whether he can or not is relevant to the example. Therefore, Morgan is a fish, right? Does the syllogism work? Why not?
Because Morgan is not a fish.
But a syllogism doesn't test truth, right? It just tests logic. So, if we're reading this for logic, does the syllogism work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I can swim.
Yeah, even though it's not actually true, right? I'm sure, like,
I get it.
yeah, I don't see any gills on you, right? So I'm assuming that you're not a fish. But yeah, so you have to be careful with syllogistic reasoning because a statement can be logical without being true, right? So an enthymeme is essentially a syllogism with one of the premises implied, right? Rather than clearly stated. So what an enthymeme typically asks you to do is infer what that implied premise is, right? So I'm going to give you, it'll make sense if I give you a couple of examples, right? Some of them are actually structured pretty much exactly like syllogisms. A bigger burger is a better burger the burgers are bigger at Burger King. So what's implied here? What's the premise that's left out? What is this asking us to infer? If a bigger burger is a better burger, and the burgers are bigger at Burger King, yeah, essentially this is a syllogism without the conclusion, right? The way you finish this, the thing you're meant to infer from this, is that the burgers are better at Burger King. If a bigger burger is a better burger, and the burgers are bigger at Burger King, then the burgers are better at Burger King, right? It's from an ad from the 1980s. But advertisements often do this kind of thing, right? They're trying to lead you in a particular direction or to a particular idea, right? Without explicitly stating it. All right, so let me give you another example. This is a famous Johnny Cochran quote. I don't know, it's been a long time now. How familiar are the two of you with the O.J. Simpson trial? A little bit? Okay. And kind of like what, the major piece of evidence was? Right, was that bloody glove. So Johnny Cochran, in his closing statement, said, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. So what's the unstated premise in here, right? Why does this make sense? If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Because it doesn't fit how you could do it.
Pardon?
If it doesn't fit how you could do it, or put them.
Yeah, if the glove doesn't fit, then you no longer have any evidence that puts the defendant at the scene, right? So the implication here is that if your piece of evidence is inadequate, then your case falls apart. All right. Here's one from the Star Wars movies. Powerful you have become. I sense the dark side in you. What's the implied premise here?
Power makes you, I don't know if it turn into a bad person, it's so sad.
Close.
Power changes you.
I think you're kind of putting events in the wrong order here, right? How did the person this is spoken to become powerful?
Because of the dark side.
Yeah, exactly. The dark side is what made you powerful, right? That's what's suggested here, right? I sense the dark side in you, right? So going bad is what made you powerful, right? That's the implied premise here. Okay, one more. This is from a hair metal song from the late 1980s. if you got a hunger for what you see, you'll take it eventually. You can have anything you want. But you better not take it from me. Okay, so think about this for a minute. What's the implied premise here? What's suggested here but not clearly stated?
You can have anything.
Okay, that's clearly stated, right? Can you have anything you want, though?
No, if it's from them, they can't have it.
Yeah. You can't have what's mine, right? Okay, so let's push this a little further. Like, according to the logic of this, right? Why can you have anything you want?
Because everything is open to you.
Everything, okay, so, but like, in terms of the lyrics here, like, what makes everything open to you?
If you got a hunger for it,
Yeah. So if you want something bad enough, right, you'll reach out and take it, right? You can have anything you want as long as it's not mine, right? So what's the implied relationship here then between the person saying the lines and the person on the receiving end? Why can't the person hearing this just take things from the person saying it? What's the person saying it trying to apply about themselves?
Because they're more hungry for it.
Yeah, that I'm hungrier and stronger than you are, right? If you're hungry and strong, you'll take what you want, right? But I'm hungrier and stronger than you are, so if you try to take my stuff, I'll cut you, right? So, does everybody understand how this works, like what we're doing here? Do you think you could find some examples and try to pick them apart? And yeah, so what I want you to do, right, so you're going to find 5 out in the wild on your own. And please do not just pick them up on an Enthymeme examples website, right? I know these exist. I know which ones they are, and I recognize the ones that they tend to use on these websites, right? So really, just try to look for them like in conversations you have with other people, in pop music, in movies, in TV, books, advertising, whatever, right? Once you start looking for these, they're all over the place, right? And you realize that this is actually an integral part of how human beings communicate. Okay, so that's what you're going to be doing for next time, right? So let's talk about what you did for today. Can everybody please turn for a moment to page 81, and we'll talk over these metaphor exercises.
okay. The 2 paragraphs we take from our writing go with exercise 6.1.
Pardon?
The 2
That's,
paragraphs.
yes, that's the try this exercise 6.1, yep. That's, yeah, that's the claim and evidence one. And as usual, like, all of the exercises will make more sense if you read the chapter first, right? Before you try to do the exercises. Okay. So, let's talk a little bit about metaphor. All right, what's a metaphor?
Comparison without using like a.
Yes. Very good. So a metaphor is a comparison that does not use like or as? What do we call a comparison that does use like or as? Yes, good. It's a simile. So what this means, right, because a simile uses like or as, a simile is an explicit comparison, right? It's drawing attention to the fact that it's comparing two things, right? When the Scottish poet Robert Burns says, "My love is like a red, red rose," the like indicates, right, look, I'm comparing these things, right? I'm comparing my love to a rose. So in a metaphor, the comparison is implied, right? You are left to make the connection. It's kind of like the difference between a syllogism and an enthymeme that we just talked about, right? The syllogism gives you all the explicit steps laid out, whereas the enthymeme only implies some of them, right? So a metaphor is an implied comparison. And again, like, metaphor is all over the way we talk, whether we realize it or not. Do either of you know what a dead metaphor is? Have either of you ever heard this term before? So a dead metaphor is a metaphor that has been used so frequently that we cease to think of it as metaphorical, right? That we come to think of it as literal. For example, what's a family tree?
All your family names together.
Yeah, it's usually usually kind of drawn out, right? It's a document with names of members of your family, dates of birth and death, right? Who they married, their children, and all so on and so forth, down from the first generation you're aware of to the present, right? And why do we call it a family tree?
Oh, it's like it's growing.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's like branches coming off of a main trunk, right? So it is like a tree. But yeah, again, like the fact that it took you a minute to make that connection shows that we don't think of it as a metaphor, right? We don't think of it as actually being like a tree. We think of it as its own thing. What do we call this part of a table that I'm kicking here? That's a leg, right? Why do we call it a leg?
Because it supports the desk.
Pardon?
It makes it stand the desk.
Yeah, it supports the desk, right? Like our leg supports us. So the origin of the term is metaphorical, right? We call it a leg because its function is similar to our legs. But again, like, we don't think of it as a metaphor because we've just used it so much. So a metaphor will typically have two parts. We call them the tenor and the vehicle. So the tenor is the subject of the metaphor, right? The main thing you intend to compare to something else. While the vehicle is the comparative term. And the same thing goes for a simile, right? So for example, if I say, "My love is like a red, red rose," what's the tenor? What's the subject? What's the main thing I'm talking about? Yeah, my love, right? And the vehicle then, the thing I'm comparing my love to, is a red, red rose, exactly. Okay, so let's have a look at these metaphors on page 81. And just, you guys actually, you did all right with them, but I want to make sure that we understand how these work, because this is actually good practice for picking apart the language of something that you're reading, right? So let's look at this first one. Conscience is a man's compass. What's the tenor here and what's the vehicle?
Conscience is tenor.
Okay, conscience is the tenor, right? That's the main thing we're talking about. Okay. So the vehicle must then be, okay. And how is your conscience like a compass? How are they similar? What justifies the comparison?
It's the way it gives you directions and helps you like in your everyday life, like through life. Like a compass helps you find directions to a certain place.
Yeah, specifically, and it's actually a little bit more specific than that, right? Like, how does a compass actually work? What does it do? How does a compass help you find your way?
With
Pointed.
Yeah, you've got a little it's a little disc with a magnet in it, right? And the magnet points. But where does the magnet always point? It always points to true north, right? So it doesn't actually point you to the direction you need to go in, right? It just tells you where you are relative to true north, right? This way's no. Actually, I think this way's north. So it doesn't so much point you in a direction as give you a standard, right, to compare yourself to. So your conscience, according to Van Gogh here, is less an inner guide and more of an inner standard, right? It's something you measure your actions against, right? It's like the thing that always points true north. All right, what about the second one here, right? All religions, arts, and sciences are branches of the same tree. What's the tenor and what's the vehicle?
Tree is legal.
Okay, is tree actually the vehicle?
branches.
Branches are the vehicle, right? Yes. And what's the tenor?
Religion, arts, and sciences.
Religions, arts, and sciences, yep, are the tenor, and branches are the vehicle, right? So how are these things like branches from the same tree?
They all have something similar that connects them.
Okay, and I think what we need to do is think about what that is, though, right? What is the similarity that connects religions, arts, and
I
sciences, right?
said life.
Pardon?
Life, I said life when I wrote it down.
That's true, because they connect, some people connect religion to science.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we do religion, I guess when we see pictures, then we connect it to art. It's like art and life.
Okay, and I think what, like, Einstein, remember, like, this is an Albert Einstein quote, when he's an academic physicist, right? So, let's think about arts and sciences the way he's probably thinking about them, right? As in, like, a college of arts and sciences, right? So, like, what kinds of subjects are in the College of Arts and Sciences here? Is it just art and science? No, it's also things like literature and history, right? Sociology, psychology, political science, right? Basically anything that's not in one of the pre-professional schools is in arts and sciences. So I think if we're talking about arts and sciences generally here, what do we mean? What are we talking about? I guess what we're trying to get at here is what's the tree, right? These are the branches, what's the tree? Religions, plural. What are all of these things? What do they all have in common? What's that? Okay, yeah, I think you're thinking you're thinking along the right lines here, right? They can be taught. Why can they all be taught? What are they? Just keep making baby steps in the right direction. They can all be taught.
You say, what are they?
Yeah, what are they, right? So they're all things that can be taught in a classroom, right? So think about what kinds of things can be taught in a classroom. What's that?
Art, science.
Now you just circled back to the beginning.
Oh, things that be taught, used in everyday life? Well,
Yeah, let's walk that one back a little bit, right? I mean, yeah, there might be everyday life applications, right? But what general term do we apply to the kinds of things that can be taught in a class? Okay, yeah, academic subjects, fields of knowledge, right? So these are fields of knowledge that are branches, so these are particular academic fields, right? That are branches of the larger kind of tree of knowledge, right? And that whole tree of knowledge actually kind of goes back to that original biblical metaphor, right? You know, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, they don't eat from the tree of life and death, they eat from the tree of knowledge, right? That allows them to know good and evil. Although that's maybe digging a little deeper than the textbook authors intended us to. All right, what about this third one here, right? All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances.
I compared it to life and death.
Okay, what's like life and death?
When it said they have their exits and entrances.
Okay, yeah.
So
with
I was thinking like life as a stage,
Okay, good.
and we're all just like players in life.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah. And what does Shakespeare mean here by players? What is he comparing us to when he uses the word players? If all the world's a stage, who's on a stage?
actors.
Yeah, by players here he means actors, right? So life is like a stage, and we're like actors, right? And birth and death are like our entrances and exits. Now, what does that suggest then about life? If life is then like what?
The movie.
Yeah, or in let's remember that Shakespeare lived long before movies,
Like a
right?
play.
Like a play, yes. So more specifically, like a play here, right? And so what does that then suggest about the level of control Shakespeare thinks we have over our lives? Yeah, there's a script, right? A play follows a script. You play the part that's written for you, right? Or the company fires you. All right, so I think we're getting the basic idea here, right? I think we understand essentially what we're doing here and how all this works. So what I would like to, does anybody have any questions about metaphor and about picking a metaphor apart? Okay, so then let's try to do some interpretive work with the poem. So I want you, as you're reading this poem, to do the same kinds of things we've been doing, right? So I want you to look for repetition, right? Look for strands. Look for binaries. Look for anomalies. Examine the connotations of specific words. But I also want you to keep a particular eye out for metaphors, for things that you think might be metaphors or similes. Right, so just take a few minutes. It's not a very long poem. And see what you can come up with, right? Go ahead and make notes on the sheet. And I'll give you, say, 8 minutes to examine the poem. Take another 2 minutes with this and try to choose something in the poem that you really want to focus on, right? Something in the poem that you want to try, that you want to explore a little more deeply. So what I'd like you to do now is take that thing that you wanted to dig into a little deeper, right? And you're gonna do 11 minutes now free writing, trying to account for that thing, right, or explain that thing and how it functions in the poem, what it tells us about what the poem means. Okay? All right, so you got 11 minutes, and remember that the key with free writing is to keep writing, right? Even if you feel like you're just spinning your wheels, even if you feel like you don't have anything more to say, just keep at it, keep writing. Yep. And remember, this doesn't have to be polished, but we are going to share them when you're done, so.
just talk about why we chose it?
No, don't so much talk about why you chose it, as like try to explain it, right?
Okay.
All right, try to tell me what you think it reveals about the meaning of the poem. You got 5 minutes to go. Just keep at it. Remember that writing stimulates thinking. 2 more minutes. You are in the home stretch. Just try to squeeze out a little more. Even if all you can think to write is this is stupid and Dr. Moyer is an asshole. Okay, that's time. All right, so what is this poem about on its surface? If we're just doing a surface literal reading of the poem, what's it about? What is that? Yes?
Crowded ball game.
Okay, it's about the movements of a crowd at a baseball game, right? So then what seems to be more important here, the game itself or the crowd's response to it?
The crowd's response.
Okay, so I think if we're talking about sort of our seems to be about X formula here, right? It seems to be about a crowd responding to a baseball game, right? So let's try to dig a little deeper into that and see what y'all came up with. So who would like to read what they came up with first? Okay, go ahead, Morgan.
Now that you just said that, I don't think this is what I wrote out, but I can still read it.
Yeah, go for it.
I chose it is alive, venomous, it smiles grimly, its
Uh-huh.
words cut. This reveals that people can laugh and smile around you and look like they have it together, but what are their true intentions? Are they smiling
Mhm.
around you because they are happy, or is it because of malicious intent? Are they giving you praises because they are proud, or is it to speak against you later? People are venomous like snakes. With what they put out can affect you whether you know it or not. So just because someone is always around you doesn't mean it's for good reason. This quote suggests that even though you are around people, you never know what their true intentions are. We are good at masking how we really feel with a smile.
Okay, so I think what I'd like to try to, I think that there are some observations here that kind of fit into the larger sort of context of the poem, right? I think like you maybe kind of took it a little bit too far out of context. But yeah, I think like let's kind of suggest what this says maybe about how the poem treats the idea of a crowd, right? So how can we fit that into a discussion of how a crowd behaves at the ball game here, or how this crowd behaves? Or is it individuals who are alive and venomous, smiling grimly, its words cut? Or is it the whole crowd?
The crowd.
Okay, so yeah, it seems to be talking about the whole crowd, right? And how can we tell that it's talking about the whole crowd here and not just individuals in it? Pardon?
It states it.
Okay, where?
4 lines or 5 lines.
Okay, so in detail, they, the crowd, are beautiful for this to be warned against, saluted, and defied. Is that what you're... Okay. So yes, so it does seem like that references the crowd, right? And what are we told about, like, even in the first little couplet there, the crowd of the ball game is moved how? Uniformly. What does it mean to be moved uniformly?
Together.
Yep, all as one, right? And there's a little play on the word unit. Like, what else do we know about baseball games and about sports games generally, and about what the players wear? Yeah, everybody wears a uniform. Everybody on the team wears a uniform. So there's a kind of play on that, right? But I think we could say that this seems to be about a crowd enjoying a ball game, but is really about the dangerous nature of crowds, right? Where else do we see potential danger in the idea of the crowd here?
Flashy female, when her mother gets it, the Jew gets it straight. It is deadly terrifying.
Okay, then read just a little further.
It
here,
is
right?
the Inquisition, the Revolution.
The Inquisition and the Revolution, yeah. What do the Inquisition and the Revolution refer to here?
The crowd.
Okay, so yeah, the crowd is this is metaphorical, right? So the crowd is being compared to the Inquisition and the Revolution, right? I think like what is being discussed here is kind of moments in history when the passions of the crowd against particular groups of people led to violence, right? So in any crowd, particularly when there is, sort of like an outsider group that's chosen or focused on, right? There is potential for violence, whether like in the case of like the Spanish Inquisition, the outsider group was Jews. In the case of the French Revolution, the outsider group was aristocrats, right? Rich people. So who might the outsider group be at a baseball game?
The opposing team.
The opposing team, yeah, especially the visiting team, right? So one thing that we're doing here, and then we'll get to your piece in a second, Jennifer, so you will have a chance as well. One of the things we're doing here as well is building towards like what we call an interpretive context. So an interpretive context is kind of the lens through which we're looking at the text we're examining, right? So in this case, we're examining, we're using typical crowd behavior at baseball games as as an interpretive context, right? All right, Jennifer, what did you write?
I only have one sentence. It said in the poem, it's stated, it is beauty the sound that lives, which would mean that beauty has this like personality apart from the person itself, I guess.
Okay, could you say that a little bit louder?
I said it, in the poem it stated, it is beauty itself that lives, which would mean that beauty has its own, I guess, personality apart from the person itself.
Okay, but where is it that, like, if we finish the sentence, right? Where is it that beauty itself lives?
They went in them.
In them. Okay, so where does this beauty reside? In the crowd. Yeah, good. And is there another word or idea that Williams seems to be connecting to beauty pretty frequently? Right, the word beautiful pops up a lot here, right? Beauty or beautiful?
The crowd.
Yeah, the crowd is beautiful, right? The crowd of the ball game is moved uniformly by a spirit of uselessness which delights them. All the exciting detail of the chase, and the escape, the error, the flash of genius, all to no end save beauty the eternal. So in detail, they, the crowd, are beautiful, for this to be warned against, saluted, and defied. So, what's the first thing that Williams describes as beautiful here? Or that has as its end beauty? All to no end save beauty.
The eternal.
Okay, so beauty is the thing that is eternal, right? Beauty the eternal. But what is he describing as beautiful here? All the exciting detail of the chase and the escape, the error, the flash of genius. What's
That's what he described as beautiful.
Yeah, this is what he's describing as beautiful, right? But what are these things? The chase and the escape, the error, the flash of genius.
It's about game.
He's talking about the game there. Yes, the game is beautiful, right? All to no end save beauty. So end in this context means purpose. So what is he saying about the game? What purpose does the game serve?
The thrill of the taste or something like that.
Pardon?
You said what you said?
Yeah. What purpose is he suggesting the game serves?
To give it thrill. To give them thrill to the crowd.
Yeah.
The escape.
Uh-huh.
The flash of genius.
Yeah, I mean, error is a specific baseball term, right? It's like it's when one of the fielders like catches the ball and bobbles it, right? That's an error. The chase and escape, what is that probably referring to? Again, if we're thinking about baseball as our context.
Chase would be when somebody is running to another base.
Yeah.
They try to get them, and then escape would be if they try to throw the ball and they lose it.
Well,
Or hit the ball and it goes out.
Well, I think, yeah, if we're talking about the escape and the chase, we're talking about running the bases, right? It's like, maybe, the runner tries to steal a base and manages to get, so he runs from second to third without getting caught, right? The error, the flash of genius, all to no end save beauty, right? What else are we to? What kind of spirit has moved the crowd?
Useless.
A spirit of uselessness has moved the crowd. That's a good question, right? Well, and again, let's think about this, right? What does a sports game, like not just baseball, but any sporting event, does it serve any real practical purpose?
That only thing for the table is like.
Yeah, it's just for the crowd to get wrapped up in, right?
So the uselessness would be for the crowd.
And the fact that the game doesn't serve any practical point, right? That spirit of uselessness, right? It's like, okay, here I'm doing something, right? I'm participating in something that's not
doing
yeah. It's like it's not directed towards making money or improving myself or anything like that, right? I'm just doing something for the beauty of it, right? That is, I'm doing something because it's pleasurable. So I think that he's kind of yoking together these ideas of beauty and uselessness, right? And we can attach another interpretive context to this. There was a philosophy in the late 19th century called aestheticism, which said exactly this, right? That the only purpose of art was to be beautiful. So, one thing we could maybe draw from some of this, right, is this, seems to be about baseball, but is really about art, right? Or is really about beauty in some way. So, because we started early, we're running short on time, right? But you see how just kind of focusing on a small portion of the poem, right? We pick that apart and then we expand it out to consider the entire poem, and we can come up with an interpretation that, kind of either expands on or cuts against the literal meaning of what we're reading. And we're going to keep exploring this kind of reading and this kind of argument as we proceed in the class. Right, so we're going to keep doing this sort of thing. Right, starts with observations, and then we try to put everything into a context to think about what it means and what it suggests. All right, so does anybody have any questions?
Okay, so the seems to be by X is the crowd in the ball game, but the Y is like the beauty of the game, the crowd.
Yeah, so we could say so something like the poem seems to be about baseball but is really about beauty or is really about art, seems to be about the crowd but is really about mob violence and conformity, right? And you can see we can get a couple of very different readings out of the same poem, right? The direction we went from your observation is very different from the way we went from Jennifer's observation.
So when we do that, we only pick one observation.
Yeah, I would say it's particularly when you're just kind of starting with something, kind of pick one track to move along, right? One interpretation, and try to stick with it, right? The one you think you can make the best case for. Yeah, it's perfectly fine, particularly when you are coming up with ideas, to acknowledge other possible interpretations, but just kind of pick and stick with the one you think is the strongest. All right, so if no one has further questions, then I'll see you all on Thursday.